joining this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about law number 5. Law number 5 states, if heat is added to particles, they expand, become lighter, and rise. But if heat is taken away, they shrink and fall back down. Let's take a look at what that means. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to watch a demonstration of when ice melts and turns from a solid, liquid, and gas. So let's watch this first. Okay, so here we are with our first demonstration. We are going to watch the 5th law of the universe in action. And we're going to do that by taking an ice cube and dropping it into a pan. The stove is on, and so we have a heat source. And that heat source is going to it's going to make this ice do something. And most of you probably already know what's going to happen, but this is definitely one of those demonstrations that's important. It's important to sit and just watch, because it has some very interesting things and ideas. Remember, if you're going to do this at home, make sure mom and dad are with you. Mom or dad, this is definitely not something you should be doing by yourself. So I'm going to drop this in the pan and we'll watch what happens. So this pan is already hot, so here we go. Whoa! Immediately something happens. So we see when the heat source is really hot, we immediately saw that the ice has melted and has turned into a liquid. And if you're watching closely, you can see that there's steam rising. That's that liquid turning into a gas. And that gas is rising into the air. The water is also boiling. When water gets to a certain point, it starts to bubble, and we call that boiling. Now at this point, if I wanted to, I could take this off the stove and I could pour the liquid into another container and put it in my freezer and watch watch what happens when you take heat away. But here we let all of the water escape into the atmosphere. Welcome back. Now I know that the demonstration of the solid, liquid, and gas, or the demonstration of the ice melting, is probably something that you've seen before, but it's worth taking a look at. And maybe even after you have watched this next part, you might go back and re-watch that demonstration, or ask mom and dad to help you do it at home. Don't do it without mom and dad's help, though, because it can be dangerous working on a hot stove, and it can be a little dangerous. So please be careful and make sure mom and dad know what you're doing. But now let's take a look, because this law talks about the particles. So now it's time to think about what happened to that ice as you were adding heat. So let's take our imagination and zoom in on that ice. And here I have a solid. And we know it's a solid because the particles, these little bits, these little circles, are very close together. They're very tightly packed together. And so this we could say is ice. When we add heat to a solid, we say that it starts to melt. But what's actually happening is that the particles are spreading out. So let's spread these particles out. And they're putting more space in between each other. but they're still heavy. So they kind of fall down to the bottom of the container. Remember, a liquid takes the shape of its container while a solid doesn't. And so now we've got this liquid here, and the particles have fallen down to the bottom of the container, but now they can slide back and forth in between against each other, and they flow. But as more heat is added, the particles become lighter and lighter, and they start to move even further away apart. And you saw this in the video when the water started bubbling first. But then if you took a very close look, you could see what looked like smoke rising, but it's actually not smoke because there was no fire. It was actually the water particles rising up into the air. I'm actually going to move these out of the container a little bit too. I don't know if you'll see that. It might be off camera now. But the particles were rising. Now, in a gas, the particles are very light. And remember that they like to zoom around. They like a lot of space. So they were escaping from the container into the air. There's a lot of water particles in the air. That's a gas. You breathe a lot of it in. Don't worry, you won't drown. But these particles turn into a gas. And when water turns into a gas, so when the liquid water gets heated and starts to boil, it begins to, what we call, say, evaporate. The particles get lighter and they start escaping up into the air, and we call that steam. And it looks like smoke, I know, but it's not, it's water. And that steam rises into the air and it mixes with the rest of the air. And then what happens is if you, let's say we reverse, let's say we put this in the freezer now and we started to cool it down. Now in science, we don't say we make things cold. We actually say we take away heat. So I'm going to turn this card over. And now let's say heat has been taken away. And our water, our gas, is now starting to cool. Well, the first thing that's going to happen are the particles are going to get heavier. And they're going to start falling back down to the bottom of the container. And sometimes you see them sticking. If it's on a hot summer day, you'll see that the particles stick to the glass of a very cold drink. There's a fancy word for that too, condense. And so that gas turns back into a liquid. And then if we continue to take away heat, and the liquid cools and cools more, if it's in the freezer, for instance, the particles are going to start sticking together even more. And I don't think I'm going to get that perfect square back, but I'm going to stick these closer together. Like this. And now it's a solid again. And that's our ice cube. It's back to being an ice cube. And remember, solids don't take the shape of their container. They're very heavy though, so this whole thing would be at the bottom of the container, and that's where it would sit. So that's what happens when we talk about law number 5. When we say that particles change from one state to another. We're talking about solids turning into a liquid when heat is added, liquid turning into a gas when heat is added. And then turning that backwards, we could say when heat is taken away, gas turns into a liquid, and a liquid turns into a solid. Now, what can you do with this information? You could draw the model that I just made with little bits of clay and into your notebook, and you can copy down law number 5 into your notebook and draw these particles. First, you can make 3 boxes. I even have something here. I made a little container, and you can draw first a square full of a solid, and then you can draw another square where heat has been added. You can even make a flame underneath. And you can draw another square where the particles have turned into a gas. You might even want to reverse it and draw about what happens when you take heat away, when you cool something down. I'll put an example of my notebook on as a link, as a picture, so that you can see what I did with my notebook to give you some idea of what I'm talking about there. Another thing you could do is you can actually get little bits of clay and make your own particles, or if you still have that bag, if you bought a bag of peas, you can also, if you wanted to put peas in a jar, I don't know if I said that in the last one. But you can get little bits of clay, that's all these are, and you can make your own model. And again, you can have your same. Maybe it's time now, or maybe you want to make your own little labels. Make a model of a solid and have your solid particles. You can have another label that has a liquid and have a model, a clay model of what a liquid particles look like. And then you can make another model of what the gas looks like. And you can put that on your shelf as well. Maybe you may want to take it to school and show your teacher. Or maybe you want to try to explain this to your little brother or sister, or to mom or dad, and tell them what you've been doing. Or maybe you just want to enjoy it for yourself. It's really up to you. You know, it's your learning, it's your universe. You decide what you want to do with this information. But it's important to make a decision to do something. So, that's the end of law number 5. And like I said, I really think now that you've seen the model, I think it's very important that you go back and you watch the demonstration of the ice melting again, or you ask mom or dad to help you and try it yourself, so that you can see and you can really use your imagination and think about what those particles are doing as that ice turns into water, and as that water turns into steam.